Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Before we get started with my two guests that are on the show, I want to give everybody a heads up, a trigger warning that we're going to be talking about a very difficult topic in this show, and that is the topic of suicide. My guest for coming on, and I appreciate them both for being here, is Brent and Paula AuCoin. If I pronounced that right. I think I did. We're going to talk about their son, Christopher AuCoin, who passed away in December 7th, 2022, at a young age of 52. And it's a very difficult topic, but I appreciate them for being here. Brent, Paula, welcome.
Thank you for having us on your show. Any
Absolutely, sir.
opportunity that we can get to share Chris's story with others, we're grateful. Thank you.
Absolutely, sir. And we talked for a while, like about a week and a half ago or 2 weeks, and we talked on the phone. And first of all, I'm sorry, very, very sorry for your loss. But I want to talk about Chris's life because he led a remarkable life. I understand he was a veteran of the Marine Corps, and then he got into law enforcement. But can you talk about his life for a little bit, sir?
Yeah. So Chris started out wanting to be a police officer, when he was just a young boy. Paula's father was a small town cop back in the 50s, and his legacy was kept alive through Paula and Paula's mother. And he never met his grandfather, but I think he just fell in love with him and wanted to follow in his footsteps. So all his life he talked about wanting to be a police officer, and so as he got older into high school and into his senior year specifically, he told us that he had entered the early enlistment in the Marines, and this is when he was 17. And Paula and I had slightly different plans for him. Not that joining the service was bad or wrong or anything like that, but we wanted him to go off and get his schooling first, and then where he went from there would be his choice. But so anyway, because he wasn't 18, we got him out of it. But about a month later, when he turned 18, he came back at the dinner table and said, "Dad, I joined up in the Marines." And so he was a Marine. And
Wow.
while we had, we had our, concerns about the military and war, and because it's real stuff,
Oh yeah.
it's a TV show or anything like that. It's real bullets and real risks and whatnot. So anyway, Chris went to boot camp, and then in December they announced the Iraqi war. So they called Chris back. He was going to the University of Lowell at the time, and they landed in Kuwait January 1st, 19. It was 91.
I was going to
So
say
it was
it's for
January
1991. Yeah.
January of 91, right, just after Christmas. And he would write to us, and of course, we would listen to the news, which was probably our first mistake. And he would write us letters, and he would send us these little cassettes saying, "Hey, things are great here. We're okay, Mom and Dad. And if I know you're okay, I'll be okay." And that's the way he would end his letters or his recordings. And so, and of course, what I'm going to share with you, we did not know until actually after Chris's death, that they were given their last rites the night before. Their mission did not have great odds. Their job was to keep the Iraqis back as long as possible, but that they knew the odds were um, so off that the Marines would not succeed. So they went off into the next morning, and the battle started, and Chris and his fellow Marines were being shelled like crazy. Um, They were actually cornered at one point. Chris's job was a saw gunner,
Hmm.
and so there were two of them, Chris and one other Marine. And Saddam Hussein had set the burn piles on fire. What I'm told is that the prevailing wind was in one direction every day, all the time, without fail. And so his strategy was that he would light these oil fires, and the black smoke would blind the Americans, and that they would go in and take the Americans out. On this one day, and to my knowledge, it never occurred again. The wind changed directions. So the wind went into Saddam Hussein's direction, and the Americans were able to defeat the elite armies and basically change the direction of the
Hmm.
war. But the night before, those young men, our son included, the age of 18, I think he was probably wondering, what are my parents going to do
Yeah.
if I can't get back to them and tell that I'm okay? And so it turned out good. There was loss. There were Iraqis and there were American Marines on the ground, and it just was a horrific scene. And so anyway, fast forward, Chris comes home, and they had a welcoming home in Merrimack where we lived. And Chris got off the bus and we met him and everything was fine. He was the same young man that left us, just a few months ago
Hmm.
from then. And he got a job. He went right into a job. As a matter of fact, one of the local town had an opening for him, waiting for him, and basically had a cruiser running for him. And so he went pretty much directly from the Marines into law enforcement. And he did that for what, about a year and a half, something like that.
Yeah,
For
close
about
to 2 years.
yeah, close to 2 years in a local town. And during that time, he came across some very horrible scenes, situations he came across involving parents and children. And he moved on into the state police, and I think it was 93, and as a trooper, driving a car on the roads. And he soon became the commander of the SWAT team for about 10 years. And in the 10-year period that we and Chris were in his PTSD dilemma, he would share some stories with us, and they were horrific. So Chris spent 10 years managing the SWAT team, and then he was towards the end of his career in it was about 2012. About 2012, he was promoted to major. He still had the SWAT team underneath him, but he had some awesome state troopers in that organization. And so everything was still good.
Hmm.
Chris would tell us about a few things, about things that he did and saw as a police officer. And we'd look at each other and say, how can he do this? He doesn't seem to be bothered. He can talk about it as, sort of a matter of fact kind of thing. And it wasn't Chris. Chris had a huge heart. He was always watching to see how we were doing. You okay, mom, dad? He would take care of his brothers. He was just a great kid. And he wasn't showing signs of wear or anything, being exposed to these things. And so in 2013, he noticed some changes in his personality, his bodily functions, and something was wrong, something was up. He didn't know what it was. So he had it checked out, and it came back positive for thyroid cancer. And so they took the thyroid out. And of course, when you take someone's thyroid out, a lot of the body regulations gets messed up, and they
Yeah.
try to get it back in sync with medication. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. With Chris, it was a hit or miss. It would work for a while, and then it wouldn't work, and they'd go through different drugs to try to offset that. And it never did really settle down. And so Chris started to show signs of wear and tear from the military, but also as a police officer. And it got to the point where Chris thought it would be best to retire from his position from the state police, which he did. And when he did that, things got a little worse. I think Chris lost his sense of purpose,
Yeah.
his direction in life. He was always a go-getter and first one to volunteer for things both in the war and also as a police officer. And he suddenly lost that. And so that's when things started to heat up in terms of Chris's PTSD journey. So we started to see stronger changes in his characteristic, his personality, his actions. I remember one day going up to his house to see him, see how he's doing, and no one was home. And I looked in the garage, and there was a huge motorcycle, the biggest one I'd ever seen, and that was not Chris.
Hmm.
Chris was when Chris was the major in the state police, he would get his suits from what was it?
Goodwill.
The Goodwill. He would not go to a store and buy a brand new suit because the money he earned was for his family. So he
Yeah.
just did not spend money on himself. And so when I saw that, my heart sunk because I knew Chris and I knew something was wrong. And then there was another extravagant expenditure a few months later. But we started to see changes in Chris's personality, and we saw signs of alcohol, and we saw, he was developing a sense of anger and
Yeah.
anxiety, a little bit of depression, and all of these things started to get worse as time passed. And towards the end of his 10-year journey, it wasn't anger anymore. When he'd get into those moments, it was rage. It was
What,
rage, and it was dangerous.
what was Brent? What was Chris like when he returned from the Middle East? When he returned, what was his demeanor when he came back from being in theater, over in Iraq and Kuwait?
It was it was the old Chris,
Okay.
Pat. I asked him about what happened over there, and he says, "No, Dad." He said, "My job was to transport prisoners," which was true, but he did not talk about the war. The times when his troops were being bombed and there was nowhere to go. I talked with another one of Chris's friends who came back from the war and is still with us. And this guy's like 6'3", a big tough guy. And I asked him, I said, "What was it like over there?" And he says, "To be honest with you, I was so afraid I can't remember." And I don't know if that was the situation with Chris or if Chris did not want to share it with us for other reasons.
Yeah.
Chris has a number of medals that we didn't know about until shortly before his passing. He took them out and put them in a shadow box and presented them to his daughters. And that's the first time that we knew he had all these medals. And just to kind of go back a little bit, the thyroid cancer was caused from the burn piles.
That was my first thought that of, what he was exposed to down in, the Middle East.
And we hoped, because we didn't know what was happening with Chris, that this mood change would be corrected when his thyroid was removed and, he got regulated with medications. But unfortunately, that wasn't the problem. The problem was what he had been keeping down in his toes all these years, the stoic personality and the, nothing bothers him. So when he got sick with thyroid cancer, everything was changing.
Yeah.
And that's when everything he'd been hiding from us for all these years came out like a volcano.
Paula,
I,
Paula, really quick, what was he like as a kid? Was he stoic? What was obviously he has loving parents, but what was he like as a kid?
he was, we have this saying, if there was such a thing as a perfect kid, and we all know there is not, but if there were, he would
Okay.
get the ribbon. He was an easy kid, and he was always, like Brent had said earlier, looking out for others and loving, and just Chris was amazing. And,
Yeah.
not that his brothers aren't, but, we had him alone for 6 years. We started out very, very young, and we had him alone for 6 years, and we developed a very unique relationship with Chris because we were growing with him at the
Yeah.
same time.
Yeah.
So, he just was always, he started out with his serving other people as an altar boy.
Yeah.
And, then when he gets into high school, he's looking to be a police officer. And his belief, and I think he was right, is that becoming the police officer, he needed to take the journey to go into the military first. And so he was always goal driven, always, even from a really young age. And he would attain the goal, and then he would go on to the next one.
Yeah.
So he just always had a vision and
A mission.
and a mission. Yeah.
Well, it
Yeah.
sounds like he was very humble too. He wasn't, I mean, I don't know. I mean, just the fact that he was decorated and he had all these medals that he earned in his
He
time
was
in the
so
military.
humble.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a part of him, but he wasn't like some people parading it all around, Hey, look at what I did. I mean, it sounds like he was a very humble guy.
I mean, as a kid, he would be kind of embarrassed, uncomfortable, I guess I would say, when he was given a gift.
Yeah.
And during his illness, I started to pick up on the unworthiness he was feeling. And, it started to connect the dots to how he reacted to things when he was a younger kid. I remember we gave him a really nice watch for his graduation from high school. And I remember thinking, he seemed so uncomfortable with it. And he just didn't want to make a big deal about himself.
Yeah.
He was very humble.
Chris was a true servant.
Yeah.
Right. He put others ahead of himself, but he also had that tiger inside, that lion inside, that when he needed to show that side of him, he could. I remember shortly after he came back from the war, he got this job with a small little town police department, and he got called to a suspected robbery. So he gets to the little shopping center, and he spots the guy, gets out of his car, and he's running after him. Now, this probably isn't the best protocol, but this just gives you some insight as to how he was thinking just off from the war, that perhaps he was invincible. But he chases the guy in the woods. He jumps off from a boulder and leaps at the guy and brings him down. And, successfully. And when he told us that, I said, Chris, why did you do that?
What do you say?
He said it was the only way I could get him dead.
Well, they
Yeah.
teach you in the Marine Corps, you gotta, don't, solve it. You got a
Yeah.
problem, you got to solve it. It's,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah, but
well,
he
go
truly
ahead,
was
sir.
a servant. He truly was a servant, Pat.
Well, people, yeah, I mean, people, we talked a little bit before we started, yes, I mean, that's why people get into this profession. That's why people serve in the military, because they're servants. They want to serve, they want to give back, they want to give back to their country, they want to give back to their communities. But, to carry all that inside, and not, I get it. We talked about this, Brent, before. It's a lot with first responders is just first of all, they, especially, a big, tough Marine like Chris is, he's been through war, and they teach you in the military. They taught me in the military is you better suck it up. You're not going to, because you're on mission, you got to do this, you got to do that. And I understand that, to a point, it keeps you alive, but to carry that in you, even when you're back from the war, a lot of times with first responders and veterans, as you both probably know, they're embarrassed because they're always the person that people are going to. They're always taking care of other people. And when they're struggling, it's very difficult for them to come forward and say, "Hey, mom, dad, I'm struggling." Because they're very proud, they're ashamed too, because they should be strong enough to handle this. And that's not how life works. Everybody has their breaking point. So, but I just, like with you were, oh, go ahead, sir.
The other thing is, I don't think civilians, and I'm a civilian, I've never been in the military. They wouldn't take me, but people who are in war, in a war, or people who show up at someone's door because it's domestic abuse, or a firefighter or an EMT that's going to that accident and has no idea what they're going to see, or the doctors or the nurses. These are all people that are on the front line, maybe not in a foreign country, but they're on the front line and they have no idea what's going to be required of them. We are so fortunate that we have people who love what they do. When Chris came home, his fellow Marines stuck close to each other. And when Chris passed at his funeral, we had people that traveled from Florida, from all over the place, to come pay their last respects to Chris. And it was just, I mean, that was part of what got us through that day.
Yeah. What happened, Paula, getting back to what you were talking about, the changes in Chris? What was going through your mind, Paula, and you, Brent, too, when you saw these changes in your son? Like, this isn't my son. I mean, he's never been an extravagant spender. He's very humble. He buys his stuff at Goodwill. Now he's drinking. What was going through your head at that point?
Disbelief, because
Yeah.
it was such a, you know, such a dramatic change in his personality. And
Yeah.
that's when the thyroid happened. We had hoped that was going to be the cure, but it wasn't. That was just, another symptom of him being exposed in a war. And, it started out with disbelief, and then it turned to fear. What is going on here? How can we help? And, him being a Marine and a police officer, he didn't want to be sick. He didn't want help. He wanted to take care of it himself, because that's what you guys do. You take care of others. And so it was, the fight to convince him that we need to do something. And he bought into it eventually. But it just progressively got worse. And we were just talking today. There's some years it was particularly bad, like 2015 and 16 were particularly bad. And we just didn't know what to do. And we're telling, Chris is, of course, drinking, but that's not the only problem here. He's depressed, he's angry, he's anxious, he has PTSD. And, people would say, well, you just got to let him hit his bottom. Well, him hitting his bottom would be death.
Right.
So we didn't buy into that. And we literally, every day, we had close contact with Chris. Either he was here living with us during a spell where he didn't want to be near his girls. He would stay with us, or, we'd be on the phone every day, checking in with each other a couple times a day. And we were always waiting for the next shoe to drop. Mm-hmm. And so that's how we lived for the 10 years that Chris was going through this.
Jeez.
And we just hoped and prayed that, there would eventually be, we'd eventually find something that worked. And toward the end of his journey, I think it was 2020 or 21, he had a particularly bad incident, and he had lost his license, and he'd been drinking, and he was staying with us at the time. And he got in his truck, which was parked in our yard, and took off. and he was going to head to Florida, to our place in Florida. And along the way, you know, things got worse and worse, and he was lost on a turnpike in Pennsylvania when he was heading to Florida. And here he is, you know, a state trooper who can't find his way up back home.
Mhm.
And so we went through that, and we knew that he had been drinking, and we made the decision to call it in because we were afraid for other people as well.
Yeah.
Could I add to that? So we were watching Chris on our phones, right? He would go one way, turn around and go the opposite way, and then turn around and go for hours. And so we came to the point where we said, look, you know, if we call the police, you know, he's done. I mean, he was a habitual offender, but we said if we don't, and he hits somebody and he hurts somebody, that's our fault. That's our responsibility.
Yeah.
So we did call the police, and he did get arrested. You know, go ahead.
People actually on the highway had called in, you know, some erratic driving. So it wasn't totally because of us. But that incident, you know, he was brought to the station, and we asked him to please not put him in jail, just bring him to a hospital. You know, we've been through this so many times. We know what needs to be done. So Brent and I were already on our way to New York, is where he got had an accident, and they brought him to the hospital, and they let us take him with us, and Brent drove Chris in his pickup truck back home. I followed, and we brought him directly to a VA in Massachusetts, where he stayed for quite some time and got help. And from that day forward, he was sober and doing well until just a couple of months before he took his life, when he relapsed.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it looked really good. It looked like he was going to make it. And, you know, he would say, we'd say, how are you doing today, Chris? And he says, well, you know, every day is not a great day, but some days are worse than others.
Mhm.
And so he just was learning to live with, you know, his condition.
Mhm.
But he had heart surgery. He had open heart surgery in July of 2022. And it was pretty difficult for him because he was young and very strong and was a weightlifter and had very big muscles. And so there was a lot to get to his heart. And so he was in a lot of pain after the surgery. And he tried very, very hard not to take narcotics for the pain. But you can't go through that with nothing.
Yeah.
And so that was July, and he worked really hard to get back on his feet. But come early fall, there were signs again of relapse. And, you know, I think it could have happened anyways, but I think the heart surgery and the narcotics and the depression people after heart surgery started it all up again.
Yeah. I mean, when you're on those, I mean, I don't know what he was taking, Percocet or oxycodone or something. I mean, those painkillers are powerful, you know that. And being sober and in recovery from alcohol, once you get that in your system, and again, this is not an indictment on people who are taking medicine. I'm just saying that when you're in recovery, I'm in recovery. And so if I'd have to be really sensitive about taking stuff like that, because then that could throw me back into, you know, drinking all the time.
And laid-out counselor once told me, because I'm in recovery myself, that it tickles a part of your brain,
Absolutely.
the alcoholic part of your brain that wants you to start you craving again.
Absolutely.
And I think that was part of the problem of his relapse.
I think one of the things that we struggled with the most, Pat, over the 10 years was finding help.
Yeah.
Right. So we would go to a facility like First Base?
Home base.
home base in Boston, funded by the Red Sox. A terrific organization. Just they do a lot of good work. But Chris had all of these moving parts that we call PTSD, right? And we'd go somewhere and they would treat one thing, and we'd leave with all the other moving parts still moving. And so we could never find a solution for Chris. So, you know, when we would, like, for example, when he had his heart operation, that introduced the depression that just wasn't being addressed. He was given medication, but with all these other things, it just masked that, and we really didn't know what to do.
Was there any indication, Brent and Paula, that obviously he had the signs. He was very depressed. You know, he just had a big, huge surgery on his heart. He was struggling with thyroid stuff. With his, did you ever think that he would come to a point where he would take his own life?
We've because we track him on our cell phones as well as his daughters and wife.
Yeah.
You know, we knew where he was, and we were able to rescue him many times.
He was intubated
from an
He was
attempt.
intubated.
Oh, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. He was intubated 3 different times. Once in Florida, once in Vermont. It was in a park, and somebody in the morning found him, and he'd been there so long that his muscles were actually breaking down.
He was at a rehab for first responders in Vermont when this happened, and he actually wrote a note to his family. So he was serious.
It was
Yeah.
planning.
And
Yeah.
another time we sent him on a plane to go to Florida to a rehab, and things happened along the way. And by the time he got there, he had been drinking, and he gotten himself into some trouble with a street person, and he had signs of overdose, and we called the police. They found him, and she was afraid that he was unresponsive when she found him.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So again, he went to the hospital, and we got on a plane, and he was intubated when we got there. So there were a lot of attempts, a lot of close calls, and Chris was exposed to something, and I'm not going to go into it because I don't think it's proper to go into it right now, but he was exposed to something that he shouldn't have been exposed to, that was not good for his well-being. It was mandatory in the class he was taking to get his counseling degree to be able to help other vets eventually. And he wanted to commute to this part of the program, and they said he couldn't. It was mandatory, which brought him away from his family, which brought him away from his daily exercise that kept him on the track.
Exposed him to what he's trying to stay away from, which was alcohol.
Yeah.
He wasn't able to get to his AA meetings.
Yeah.
All the things that kept him on the rails, they said were taken away, basically, because they said he couldn't commute. And Chris didn't have his creature comforts, and he drank, and there was an incident, and the police were involved. We went to, help, and he was admitted to the hospital, but he came home from that really, really
defeated,
broken and defeated. And he got some news from the school that
was
very crushing to him. And that was on a Monday or Tuesday. He went to an AA meeting, met his sponsor. He got the crushing news by email while he was sitting in the AA meeting. he left the meeting and went to the nearby pub and started to drink. His wife and his daughter went to rescue him. His sponsor was also helping, talked him into going home. He promised he would stay home for the night, but he wanted to leave because he knew he was in that bad cycle again.
Mm.
So they thought he was going to be home for the night, and he came upstairs with his cold weather gear and said he was leaving. And he walked into the woods. The power lines near his home. His daughter everyone was begging him not to leave. He went anyway. He was just, on that mission where they'll all be better off without me. So he kind of cut off the feelings that everyone else was having toward him. And he went into the woods, and it was pouring rain. It was freezing cold. It was December 6th. And Brent and our younger son were out looking for him until 2:30 in the morning, but they couldn't find him. And we had hoped and prayed that in the morning, we would find that he just was sleeping it off under a tree. But dawn came, and the search started.
The search ended.
Well, yeah.
When we arrived, so back up a few steps. So we got a call from Chris's girls. They said, Dad's been drinking. He's got his cold weather. No, this is the 6th of January, and it was raining. He's got his cold weather equipment, and we think he has a gun. So my youngest boy and I drove up immediately. It was dark, and they told us where he had entered the woods, which was part of a power line. And like Paula said, there were no stars. It was freezing cold out. It was pouring out. And we were following Chris by our cell phones. But his girls, unbeknownst to us, was also trying to call Dad, text Dad. And I could literally watch the phone battery go lower and lower and lower. And so I called the girls and I said, please stop calling Dad. This is the only way we have to track him. Mm-hmm. So we continued to track Chris, and yelling and screaming and, Chris, it's Dad, I'm here. Where are you? And all of a sudden we'd see the little dot in my phone move. So we did that until about, as Paula mentioned, until about 2:30. And we had been through this many, many, many times. And so once again, I was faced with a dilemma. Do I call the police, or do I hope and pray that this is yet another time that Chris will come through? I didn't want to call the police because they would come with dogs. And Chris had mentioned to his wife that don't call the police because I may create a situation where they might have to shoot me. So I didn't dare do that. So I didn't call them, and we stopped the search because the phone was dead. So we went home about 2:30. Paula and I got back around just daybreak, and it was still cloudy and sprinkling, and just a horrible day. And as we got there, Chad had got there first, our youngest, and found him. And Nathan got there, our middle son, shortly after. And when we drove in, we saw them walking down the hill, down the power line, and crying, shaking their heads. And that's when our life turned upside down. Yes. It's a feeling that there are no words to describe. Empty. I felt like, how can I reverse this? How can I change this outcome? This can't be. And I felt like I needed to run somewhere, but I didn't know where would I run. I didn't know where to run. I was just totally void of everything. So as it turns out, Chris, where they found Chris, I had been about 100 feet from Chris, and he didn't answer me, and I didn't have the precise location of Chris. So, and then of course we lost the phone tracking. So we decided to go home that night, and that wasn't the right decision.
Wow. I'm so sorry, Brent. I'm so sorry.
family members. He wasn't in a very good state of mind. And he called family members. And he called me at midnight, and Brent and I were on cell phone talking to each other, and Chris called the home phone, and he was crying hysterically, begging me to release him. And he said, "Mom, please release me, over and over again." So much so that I couldn't get a word in edgewise to stop him from talking, so I could try to start to help him in some way. And so in order to make him stop saying that, I just said, okay, Chris, I release you, but, and on the but, he hung up the phone. So, hindsight's 2020.
No.
Wasn't expecting, even though we were fearful of it for all those years, you don't expect it to become a reality.
No, you just hope that it's going to be another close call, but he'll come through it.
I'm so sorry again for your loss and your family's loss. But I want to ask, after this horrible tragedy, what did you both do to help yourselves, like with counseling, grief counseling, things like you mentioned, what you went to, that organization that took you in and treated you so well, and what about counseling and other types of therapy that you both have gotten or haven't you?
We did. Brent, we were both hurting pretty bad, but Brent was really hurting. I was afraid that I was going to have another suicide on my hands. And so I got busy right away trying to find some help, which it was right around the whole COVID time. So
made it a little bit more difficult.
Yeah. So we went to Florida in February that year. We went later, and we weren't even sure we're going to stay, but we got hooked up with a counselor who was actually leading this grief support group that we call Grief Share. That's usually done through churches. And she was a counselor who had also lost a daughter to suicide. So, there's no such thing as a coincidence. So we saw her the entire time that we were in Florida that winter and continued with Grief Share. And when we got back, we sought out a counselor here, and it had to be Zoom because that's all there was.
Yeah.
And we, TAPS isn't in our area, so there's a lot we can do with TAPS, but we stay involved in it because we really enjoy the camaraderie and these seminars and workshops that they have. And so we kind of limped along, thank God that his brothers and sisters in the police and the military held us up along with our own friends.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't for them, I don't know what we would have done. And so we kind of limped along. And then in the fall of last year, just before it was Chris's second anniversary, we had both been thinking about doing something, but we didn't know what to do. And we wanted, whatever we chose, we wanted to put all of our heart and soul into it and for it to make a difference. And so just, from talking to one person who talks to another person, who talks to another person, we got connected with Swim with a Mission, Phil Taub and his wife. And here we are today because of that.
Yeah. It's
that was finding help, Pat, was difficult, not only for Chris, but also for us. And I think one of the issues is that when we go looking for counseling, we don't look for the right type of counseling, right? So it needs to be a trauma-based counselor,
Hmm.
someone who understands when you say PTSD, they understand exactly what you're talking about. So many times you hear people refer to PTSD as, I almost got in an accident and I've got PTSD and I can't, I had one guy come up to me and was talking to me about PTSD, and he had his little dog with him. And he says, "Yeah, my little guy here's got PTSD." People do not understand what veterans, what police people and fire people experience. Unless you're in their boots, it's impossible. But people need to have more understanding and more empathy for people who come home differently.
Yeah. Well, I think, it's, there's so many different facets, and I agree with you 100%, Brent. I mean, there's so many, what people know about, this is my take, what people know about law enforcement is what they see on TV and the movies because it's glamorized. They're kicking in doors, they're doing all their stuff, but they're not showing the, behind the scenes, and it's Hollywood. So I get it. But you mentioned Chris, imagine how many death scenes he's been on, not only seeing in the military, but through his career in law enforcement. I've seen the same stuff where, and to your point, civilians, and I have nothing against civilians, I have nothing against them, but first responders see this on a daily basis. It never stops. And that's part of the job. But where we run into as first responders is we're always in that heightened state of, especially cops, hyper vigilant state, and we're always in that state. And so once you come down from that, you're looking to fill it with something. You're looking to fill it with something. And as far as the trauma, those hidden scars, and this probably happened. This probably started in the military with Chris, I would say, with all the death and being in those situations, and then it just carried into his law enforcement career. Um, and it's sad, but you're right. A lot of people don't understand, what PTSD actually is. It's almost like a catchphrase with some people now. I have PTSD. Okay, well, do you really know what it is? I actually like calling PTSD PTSI. And PTSI, there's such a stigma now behind the word disorder because disorder implies that, okay, it's just something that you're going to have to live with. Whereas an illness you can get over sometimes. You know what I mean? So it's just a play on words because a lot of first responders don't like that word, disorder. Unfortunately, we still call it PTSD. But it's just a tough situation for first responders everywhere and veterans. Until you walk in their shoes, don't judge them. Don't judge them because they're doing a job that most people can't do or don't want to do. But I am so sorry for your loss, Brent and Paula. It's tragic. Um, what what would you tell people now, the listeners, that you didn't know then?
People are for really anything other than the VA.
Mm,
And, God bless the VA, they do a lot of good, but there are times when you need additional support. At one time, when this was a particular time, Chris was living with us, and he comes downstairs and he said, "I'm not taking any more pills other than the ones that I need for my cholesterol and my blood pressure." He was taking 31 pills a day.
wow.
So he stopped taking 29 of them. And neither Paula nor I noticed any change in Chris. He didn't get better. He didn't get worse.
Every time he went to the VA, he came home with a new prescription.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
So, so the question to your question, we didn't. All we knew was what was in front of us, which was our son having the worst time imaginable. And we didn't, I mean, we took Chris to 8 different states, all of New England and Georgia and Florida and some of those states several times looking for help. the right kind of help. Chris even we took him to McLean's in Boston for some treatment, but we also took him there for electrical shocks. And Chris would take those electrical shocks like once a week. And it came to a point where Chris had received too many treatments.
Yeah.
And he lost his cognition. He couldn't even write his name. And the fear in our son's face was just disabilitating for us. Thank God it came back, but it was pretty tense there until it did. Finding the help was like looking for a needle in a haystack, but that's not the way it is now.
And that's why, Chris was on a mission to become a counselor to help other veterans, and then he passed. So our mission is where hopefully we can pick up where Chris left off and not do exactly what he was going to do, but in some way keep his mission going, his legacy living on, so that other people can hear the tragedy of losing our son and know now what we know, that there is help out there. But we just were learning as we went with Chris.
I think the most important thing they need to know is that they are not alone.
Yeah.
And they can do something about this, right? There are so many programs out there that we were not aware of that helps in so many different ways. We were always looking for a holistic approach in terms of a solution to Chris's PTSD, and we can never find it. It was always a one-off or a single point solution. And today there are so many programs and services and organizations to provide help that it may not be one-stop shop, but you're able to get services that address all of those moving parts that we call PTSD. That exists today.
Yeah.
And talking about it like we're doing with
Absolutely.
you. And just, being open and honest about how horrible this is for so many men and women, and, bringing awareness to it, that hopefully people will hear something and think, wow, maybe I should be looking into getting some help.
Well, and it's, we're keeping, Chris's spirit alive too. And that. I mean, he had he's done so much good, as a cop and in the military, Paula and Brent. And your mission right now with talking about this to the masses is very, very powerful. Very powerful. So I would encourage you both, and I know you are, keep talking about this, because it is so hard to get through first responders and veterans, that they need to pick up the phone and they need to get help when they start struggling. And thank God that there's people like you out there, both of you, that are making this a mission, because you're doing God's work. You really are. And I want to appreciate you both for coming on. I'm so sorry for your loss. But God bless you both, and Chris. And I thank you for taking the time to come and talk to the audience.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you for doing what you do.
Yes.
I appreciate it. Brent, Paula, God bless you both. Thank you.
God bless you, Pat. Take care.
Bye-bye.